everyone, my name is Shayna, and this is Catharsis Inc., where I delve into all things writing, literature, art, cinema, and anywhere my inner musings take me. And on this episode, I will be comparing and contrasting Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë with 7 of the movie and TV adaptations. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce my special guest, whose love for cinema, literature, and the arts by far supersedes mine, and that guest is my husband, Bobby Beksinski. Welcome to my podcast, honey.
What's up?
And now, without further ado, let's get into the good, the bad, and the ugly of Wuthering Heights. When we were first looking up Wuthering Heights adaptations, we didn't realize how many there actually were. We found approximately 35 different adaptations, so we only chose 7 of those for time purposes for this episode, but I think we chose a diverse selection, and since Bobby is the cinephile, I'm going to go ahead and let him give you a rundown of those 7 that we chose.
Okay, yeah, so we did discover that there were way more adaptations than we originally thought. Our thought process then was to be selective with a different variety, but also keeping in mind the most notable and acclaimed ones out there. Accessibility did become an issue. I would have liked to watch 2 more versions of the story, a French adaptation by Jacques Rivette, and a Spanish version directed by one of my favorite filmmakers, Luis Buñuel. Sadly, I could not track down these 2, at least not good working copies with English subtitles. However, these are the 7 that we were able to watch for this project. The first one to kick off this entire idea was obviously the brand new adaptation by Emerald Fennell that was released this past February. Then we rewatched the PBS televised production released in 2009 featuring Tom Hardy as Heathcliff. We also rewatched Andrea Arnold's raw and minimalist version from 2011. Then, for first-time views, we watched one of the most popular adaptations from 1992, featuring Ralph Fiennes and Juliette Binoche. Then, William Wyler's classic take from 1939 with Laurence Olivier, a Japanese version from 1988, directed by Yoshihisa Yoshida. Hopefully I pronounced that right. And a 1958 version directed by Daniel Petrie with Richard Burton as Heathcliff.
But before we dive into the adaptations, let's talk about the book. And I would like to mention that from this point on during this episode, there will be spoilers. So if you haven't read the novel yet and don't want to be spoiled, save this episode and come back and listen once you have. For everyone else, I'm going to assume you're familiar with the story, or if you haven't read the book, you've seen an adaptation before, so, you're familiar with that. So I won't be giving a synopsis about the book, which will save us time to effectively compare and contrast everything. So let's start with our opinions of the book first. I'm going to start us off hot here with my review of the book, and I think some people are going to clench their pearls when I say this, but I did not find Wuthering Heights to be the masterpiece everyone else thinks it is. I actually rated it a 3.5 stars, but since Goodreads doesn't allow half stars, I did give it the benefit of the doubt and rounded it up to 4. So here's my review from Goodreads. Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë is a powerful, atmospheric novel with unforgettable characters and a bleak, windswept setting that stays with you. The raw intensity of Heathcliff and Catherine's relationship and the book's exploration of obsession, revenge, and social class are compelling and emotionally charged. The structure is told through nested narrators with an often brutal, unrelenting darkness. However, some characters feel underdeveloped or unsympathetic, which can blunt the novel's impact. The prose is evocative and occasionally lyrical, but the pacing drags in places and the moral ambiguity may frustrate those seeking clear resolution. Overall, it's a memorable classic with major strengths in mood and character, though its bleakness and uneven pacing keep it from being a masterpiece for me.
As for me, I have not finished the novel yet. I'm almost there, about 70% through it. So I'm not in a position yet to write a review for the novel. I'm a slower reader than Shayna, or more than likely it's just I don't allow myself the time and opportunity to read as much as her. As she said in the introduction, I'm much more inclined to spend my free time watching and writing about movies. However, I can talk about my opinions on it thus far, about Bronte's style of writing and how the novel compares to the film adaptations that we watched.
And I'd also like to note that this episode was supposed to be out by the end of March, and that is the reason, Bobby, you are the reason that we are just now getting it out at the end of April because he's taken so long. However, I will give him the benefit of the doubt because I listened to it on audiobook, so it was a lot easier for me to get through it, and I found that specifically for classics, it's easier for me to comprehend and understand the book if I listen to it on audiobook rather than reading. And I think with Bobby, he's so intelligent that it's easier for him to understand like these classics with the different types of languages and things like that. Honey, do you want to talk about that a little bit about how it is for you reading classics?
It's ironic that you say that because I mentioned the language of the novel in my notes, which is a sort of semi-review of the book. But I noticed that despite being classical literature from the 19th century, it was a lot easier to digest, and there wasn't that roadblock that one might sometimes get from trying to interpret and understand prose written in a different century. I really like the unreliable narrator style in the novel too, and while already being familiar with the story from the film adaptations, it is quite the experiment in seeing how the novel plays out through mostly two, but sometimes three different characters' perspectives. We're witnessing their prejudices and opinions paint over the portrait of these characters' actions and history. That is not to say that any of the narrators are lying when it comes to telling this tale, but they can emotionally embellish events or reactions to seem perhaps more dramatic than they actually were. I really like Bronte's style of writing in this novel and her prose overall. I think she shined the best in her dialogue. The novel just felt like it moved at breakneck pace during the larger dialogue heavy sections. And as I was reading it, it genuinely felt like I was watching a period piece film adaptation play out. Perhaps some of the emotion was lost during these sections, though. Like, for instance, I cannot say that the original iteration of the Haunt Me monologue to be as impactful reading it as it was watching, let's say, Tom Hardy delivering a soul eviscerating performance while reciting the words.
So even though you're only 70% or so through the book, what would you currently rate it?
I really like it, but I am a tough rater even when it comes to movies. But right now I would be at a firm 4 out of 5 for me.
4 out of 5. Okay, so about the same as me, but I think you would actually rate it high. Like I rated it a 3.5.
Yeah, I'm a little higher than you.
Little higher. Okay, and I have to agree with you about the quotes. Even listening to the audiobook where and I listened to the narration by BJ Harrison, even when he said, you know, the famous quotes, even the one about he's more myself than I am, which is my favorite quote, it just didn't hit as hard as some of the movie adaptations. But I think that's about it as far as reviewing the book. Would you say, honey?
Yes.
Let's get into the movie and TV adaptations because that's Bobby's forte.
Okay, so we're gonna start out talking about each movie that we watched for this project individually, and we're gonna start with the oldest adaptation that we watched, which was the 1939 version directed by William Wyler. So what I can say overall, this was a very popular version. It featured the great Shakespearean actor Laurence Olivier in the part of Heathcliff. One thing I can mention about that is I don't think he quite sold it for me as that character, especially not compared to the other adaptations that I watched. What did you think?
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with that. Even though he might have done well in his Shakespeare movies, this one definitely did not sell it for me.
I think he wasn't as bad as the older Heathcliff, but he was just less convincing as the story backtracked in time to his younger self. This version also doesn't include anything on the second generation of the story, which we should just mention right now off the bat. Most of the adaptations kind of skip the younger offspring of Heathcliff and Cathy and Linton's and all that. But it's understanding, given the shorter runtime films. What I think Shayna and I both really liked about this version most of all was the really superb Gothic visuals. The black and white cinematography was just marvelous here, and the production design was exactly what you would expect for this story. Like, I mean, they really brought the estate of Wuthering Heights to life in this movie, exactly how you would imagine it in the book. More so than I think in any of the other adaptations that we watched.
Yeah, I loved the gothic nature of the film with the spooky moments and dark undertones. And it was really cool that despite it being in black and white, they used light effects where you could actually see Cathy's eyes welling up with tears because of the light effects. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, those actors were really tortured back in the day with those lamps just shining on them to get that effect. I guess another thing we both kind of mentioned in our notes here with this movie, and I mean, now that we've kind of read the book, we do realize the romance between Cathy and Heathcliff is subdued in the book as much as it is in this movie version as well. But I think with that said, with the book, it can be kind of subdued because we are reading the story of Cathy and Heathcliff secondhand through Nellie's perspective. So she's not always going to be present during maybe some romantic moments that happens between the characters. But back when we watched this movie, we hadn't yet finished the book yet. So we did mention, this movie doesn't really, portray that romance very well. So it just kind of feels inauthentic as the story progresses. Eventually when Cathy dies, and of course Heathcliff is, distraught about it, and it's everything that's leading up to that. It feels a little bit more inauthentic as well.
Yeah, in my notes, I actually say that it was too censored, in my opinion, to show Cathy and Heathcliff's true romantic relationship that should have been filled with passion and desire. However, like Bobby said, in the book, it doesn't really show passion and desire, but that's probably because it came from a third person point of view. And we'll get into this as we start talking about the newest adaptation with Jacob Elordi, how passionate that movie was. And I really liked that, because if we're thinking of a true love story, whether it be modern times or back in the day, people are going to be intimate. Whether it's, allowed or not, they're still going to be intimate. So I think Emily Brontë kind of had to censor herself because it came out in the 19th century, which in my opinion affected the book, and in this case the movie featuring Laurence Olivier.
I just think it also leaves a good bit up to interpretation as well, since in the book, since it is from a different person's perspective, it's more, I guess, voyeuristic. So, we don't know what's going on necessarily behind the scenes. We're only really seeing what was saw through Nellie's eyes. So we don't know what, Cathy and Heathcliff were up to when they were out by themselves on the moors away from prying eyes, or, any like late night trysts that Nellie didn't know about. But anyway, to get back to the film itself, I know, Shayna, you wanted to discuss the actress who played Cathy. Her name is Merle Oberon.
Yeah, and I actually thought she overshadowed Laurence Olivier. She did really, really good acting, in my opinion. However, since it was a movie from the 1930s, there was overacting, but I mean, back in those days, it was common during the early Hollywood times, so you're going to have that. And the other The only other note that I have from the movie is the costumes were absolutely beautiful. Even though the movie was in black and white, you could still see the detail of the costumes, and they were just gorgeous.
And I just have one more other thing to say and add about this film is it's about the ending itself. I wasn't a fan of the last little happy afterlife scene. It felt kind of like tacked on and unnatural to the story. Um, I know in the book, Shayna, you had said Heathcliff winds up dying of starvation, like
Essentially, yeah.
self-inflicted starvation.
Yep.
Which is definitely far more darker. I mean, in this one, it seems like Laurence Olivier's Heathcliff just kind of runs out the door and succumbs to the elements of like a wintry storm, and then we see him and Kathy's ghost walking hand in hand. But I much prefer something more darker, a darker tone for the story, like the way Tom Hardy's rendition ended with Heathcliff committing suicide in bed with his musket revolver. Like something like that would fit the story much better than what we got here.
I agree with that.
Okay, so the next one is the 1958 version. This is a made-for-TV version directed by Daniel Petrie. He's most notably known for Raisin in the Sun. He also directed Sybil and Resurrection. And I mean, I'm a fan of those films. And so I wanted to watch his version because of that. And then also, it has Richard Burton playing Heathcliff. And he is certainly one of my favorite actors. But to just get straight along into this thing, this was a very strange adaptation to say the least. It's a very short version, short runtime, so it glosses over a lot of the story. But not only that, I had to do a little bit of research here, but it was essentially an episode for a DuPont show of the month production. I don't know, something like 1950s television. So it was sponsored by DuPont, and you had to watch DuPont ads throughout the entire thing that broke up the film into like 3 different acts. So
And I have to say, this movie was not memorable to me at all, but the commercials. The commercials for me were the best part. It was so interesting to see products that they used back in the 1950s.
yeah, I mean, but it's already like shortening an already shortened runtime, and that completely is detrimental to the film itself. Despite that, though, despite the shortened runtime, and I mean, it did have some poor production values being made for TV. It had some erratic pacing because of that shortened runtime. I don't think it was as bad as maybe Sheena would say. I really did like Richard Burton in the role of Heathcliff. I mean, it lived up at least to that extent for me. It was one of the better renditions of the character. I think the thing that maybe surprised me the most was Rosemary Harris as Kathy. And for those of you who might not know, Rosemary Harris, this is the actress who played Aunt May in the Tobey Maguire, Spider-Man movie. So, she's a youngin' here playing Kathy. But the acting overall is one aspect of this movie that I thought was a success.
Yeah, I have nothing to add because I literally cannot remember anything from this adaptation. So sorry, honey. Can't put my input in.
Yeah, it probably wasn't very memorable. The story is just too broken up. It just kind of was like a highlight reel of the novel, going from one major event to the next. Yeah, the pacing was not the greatest. Like I said, I think if anything, some people should just only really watch this if they're a fan of the actors. Other than that, it's not a great adaptation. Okay, the next version is the 1988 version of Wuthering Heights, directed by Yoshihisa Yoshida. Again, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. But he is a Japanese film director. He made Heroic Purgatory and Eros Plus Massacre, 2 films that I've seen of his. And I would say he's definitely known for his more experimental visuals than storytelling, at least from those previous two movies that I had mentioned. Now, with this movie, I would say obviously this is the one of the loosest adaptations of the novel thus far, mainly because what Yoshida is doing here is he's taken the basic plot line of Wuthering Heights and then transporting it to Japan and mixing that in with Japanese folklore and superstition, and it's in an entirely new setting altogether. This made it really refreshing, to be honest. It was a different take on the story, and with this volcanic setting, it did make it very unique, and Yoshida definitely delivered on the visuals as well.
Yeah, and I just as some background information, one of the, I don't even know if it would be called genres or what, but one of Bobby's favorite genres, or correct me if I'm wrong, babe, is black and white Japanese films. So as soon as he told me that there was a Japanese version, I knew that was going to go on our list.
Yeah, it's not black and white though, but yeah.
Yeah. So, because like, when we first got together, me and subtitles did not mix, but here we are 18 years into our marriage, and I kind of have to have subtitles on now. Like, I don't know, it's just a thing. But anyways, even being a foreign film for me, I found it intriguing to watch. It kept my attention, and it was really interesting to see how the director portrayed Wuthering Heights using Japanese folklore. Like, even Heathcliff, his name wasn't Heathcliff. It was the word for demon in Japanese.
Yeah, they said it was Animaro. Yeah, like she said, it means demon in Japanese, at least as far as what the film relayed to the viewer. But yeah, I mean, I did like this film. Now, I think Yoshida himself, though, he's not like one of my favorite Japanese directors. I really like his visual style, but I do think he may falter a bit when it comes to plot and story. Now, I was curious to see how this would take for me, given the fact that it is, based on a classic novel, and given the fact too that it's based on an English classic novel from the 19th century, and turning that over into Japan, ancient Japan. But the story was enacted with broad strokes at times, and I do think that this version was overly violent compared to other adaptations too. And Heathcliff as a character was over the top in that violence, more so than especially now that I've read most of the book, I can say this version, he still seems even more evil and violent than even the book portrays him to be. I don't know. That's one maybe negative takeaway I would give to this film. Overall, though, it was a pretty good adaptation.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with the violence. This version was definitely violent, more so than the book or any of the other adaptations that we watched. And I'm wondering if that has to do with, the Japanese culture. Another thing that goes along with that is the Heathcliff within this version is a lot older than Kathy. And I'm wondering, too, if that has something to do with the Japanese culture as well.
Okay, let's keep this ball rolling. Our next adaptation that we watched is the fan favorite from 1992. This one features Ralph Fiennes as Heathcliff and Juliette Binoche as Kathy. Like I mentioned, this is one of the more popular adaptations out there. It is also one of the ones I would say closest to the novel in that it features both first and second generation of characters. Now, this could also be a hindrance to the film as well. I will say this is probably my least favorite of adaptation. I think trying to squeeze that much story into like a normal length runtime of movie, it's just too much, and it creates a lot of pacing issues. So between that, and I do think that despite having big name actors playing these roles, there was not that much of an emotional connection between the characters. and nor does the film really capture the dark gothic atmosphere that you would come to expect from this story. So a mixture of all of those elements is what makes this one of my least favorite adaptations. But what do you think, Shayna? What's your opinion on this one?
I have to disagree with Bobby on this one. This one was probably about number 4 out of 7 of the adaptations for me. I really liked it. I enjoyed Ralph Fiennes as Heathcliff and thought he played that character very well, in a sense that it almost scared me in the scenes where he was abusive, I guess, to little Kathy. And I absolutely love Julia Binoche, especially in Chocolat. So it was nice seeing her in this version of The Wuthering Heights. And like Bobby said, they not only showed the first generation, but they also showed the second generation with little Kathy, Hareton, and Linton. And I felt like little Kathy and Hareton's relationship paralleled that of Kathy and Heathcliff's from the first generation.
Yeah, actually, I have something in my notes of that exact same thing where there one particular scene I enjoyed was when Heathcliff grabbed little Kathy, and after she threatened him using Hareton as protection, and he stops mid grab as if some thought occurred to him. And I interpret this as like a form of deja vu. Like it dawned on Heathcliff how history is repeating itself, albeit with swapped roles. So he, in a sense, is filling in the abusive, domineering role of Hindley, and the young Hareton and little Kathy as replicas of he and adult Kathy and their young love. Is that how you kind of were seeing it?
I think during that scene, he had looked up at the portrait of Kathy on the wall and kind of froze. And since little Kathy resembled the first generation Kathy, and obviously he was looking at the portrait, I feel like that stopped him from continuing the abuse. And kind of from that point on in the movie, he changed his tone towards her. And I also think that was kind of the start of his downfall as well. He started spiraling more after that.
Yeah. The only other thing I guess I want to add here is I had mentioned before about how this version doesn't really capture the sort of dark gothic atmosphere. And I just kind of want to jokingly point out, like, this is the most fanciest, cleanest Wuthering Heights estates that I've seen so far in a movie version. And yeah, it just does not completely fit with my imagination of how it should be. And of course, what we've seen in other film adaptations so far, it's just much more luxurious and much larger in scale. But like I said, otherwise, I kind of found this one just more bland on my end.
Yeah, like Bobby said, in my notes here, I have the Wuthering Heights home was the nicest version out of all the adaptations. And when I was listening to the audiobook, it made it seem that it was more bleak and gothic and things like that. So yeah, that was definitely different than the book. But I think I would have to say I would have rather it have been more gothic, because it goes better with the story.
Yeah. Hey, this is one of the only ones that features Lockwood. I think William Wyler's did as well, but maybe just those two is the only ones that feature Lockwood.
Yep, you're right.
Every other version just casts him to a side.
Yep.
Okay, next is the 2009 adaptation, which is a British television production originally aired on ITV and making its jump to the United States through PBS Masterpiece. This is actually the first adaptation of this story that I ever watched. It was many years ago. When I first watched it, I was truly bowled over with the dark love story and Tom Hardy's masterful portrayal of Heathcliff. So for this project, I certainly wanted to rewatch it and see how it holds up after more than a decade later. I can say I still really like this version, but it is not quite as good as I remembered. The television production values really become a hindrance here. But the good news is that Tom Hardy's performance is still godlike. He is without a doubt the best Heathcliff across all adaptations. This version is also fairly accurate to the novel and even features both generations, similar to the Ralph Fiennes one we had previously discussed. I had also referred to this film as a dark love story when I had first viewed it, of which I still feel the same. Because let's face it, no matter how naive the young pair was and how their actions negatively impacted those around them, it was still at its core a love story that you could genuinely feel. No difference than Romeo and Juliet being young, obsessed, and causing destruction and mayhem in the wake of their love. This can be especially felt through Hardy's emotive performance, and his haunt me monologue deeply affects me every time I see it. I seem to be segueing into my defense of Emerald Fennell's version with this, and against the naysayers who refuse to call this a love story. So before I get too long-winded here, let me just say that psychos can love each other too, alright? So let me just pass the buck to Shayna here.
Yeah, Bobby and I actually watched this together back many years ago, and it was also my first Wuthering Heights adaptation that I had ever seen, and we both love Tom Hardy, not only in this adaptation, but almost everything that he's ever acted in. He's a great actor. But as far as this adaptation goes, my notes I wrote down here, there's definitely darker undertones. There's a beautiful, realistic home and setting to this. I love the cinematography. Also in this one, Kathy seems she doesn't seem as mean to Heathcliff in this one compared to other adaptations. And this adaptation in particular focuses more on Kathy and Heathcliff's children compared to the other adaptations, and only shows flashbacks of Kathy and Heathcliff through Heathcliff's grief. So that's a little different from the other adaptations that we've watched.
Okay, moving on from there, we have the 2011 version of Wuthering Heights, directed by Andrea Arnold. This one, she directs this tale with a naturalistic approach. It was just realism of the highest order. The film doesn't even feature a musical score, and I find that approach one of the most unique in tackling the subject matter. It's very art house, and the cinematography is just delightful. So many things do go right for this adaptation. In the decisions to cast young actors, the decision to make Heathcliff black, although there can be some discussion whether or not the description of dark skin in the novel means whether his character is, black or Moorish, or if he was likely intended to be of Romani heritage. That's obviously up for debate. But yet there isn't much chemistry between the actors here, I will say that, despite the look of everything going very well. That was, for me, the one thing holding the film back. Hindley, I will say, was portrayed really well and very believable with a nuanced villainy. Nothing over the top. This is the first version I saw where Hindley doesn't seem to essentially hold Heathcliff against his will and is openly telling him to leave. Like, he just, especially if he just doesn't accept the lowly position of servitude on the property. Like, Hindley is just fine if he just is absent from the entire thing. I appreciate the dark tone of the dialogue, something akin to the realism of the project, and speaking with a forthcoming manner. Heathcliff actually speaks of suicide in this one, but otherwise, like I mentioned before, the characters, actors, they seem to be more or less moving through the motions of the story rather than live it. Kathy and Heathcliff themselves seemed to be a bit mismatched. So it kept me at a distance a little bit, and I couldn't connect with it on an emotional level. But the film does triumph as a art house rendition of the story, and with some of the best cinematography released that year in 2011. But on to Shayna, what do you think of this version?
Yeah, I'd have to agree. This is probably my second favorite adaptation of Wuthering Heights. Absolutely loved the dark imagery and themes, beautiful cinematography of nature. And I loved the director's ability to do, I don't even know the right words for this, but like subtle things with her filming. Like, for example, there was an alive rabbit in a scene before Heathcliff leaves to go be tutored or whatever and make a man of himself. And then when he returns, the director actually shows a skeleton of that same rabbit. So I really love that. And like Bobby was talking about, there's no music score. It's all nature sounds and beautiful light. So I really like that. But I will say, I would give this adaptation a trigger warning because, like Bobby said, it talks about suicide. There is animal abuse. They also use the N word in this adaptation as well. So just be warned, not only are the themes dark, but there are some, underlying triggers that could upset you while watching it.
Yeah, definitely agree there. The animal abuse in particular was very jarring to see firsthand. But ironically, since we had watched the movie first before reading the book, it actually is featured in the book exactly as Andrea Arnold put it in the movie. So it's like, well, I guess she didn't just do it for the sake of doing it. And actually, Emily Brontë literally wrote it in the book.
Yeah, and I actually was joking with Bobby, not that animal cruelty is funny, but that Emily Brontë must hate dogs in particular because there is so much violence with dogs within Wuthering Heights. Like, what the heck is with that?
Okay, so last but not least, we have the newest 2026 version directed by Emerald Fennell. I would say I'm kind of a fan of Emerald Fennell. I mean, I thought it's ironically enough the film that gave her greatest acclaim, The Promising Young Woman, is probably my least favorite of hers. But I really liked Saltburn, and I feel like this version of Wuthering Heights carried a very similar style to that previous film. It had a unique visual display, very stylistic in its production design, and the cinematography was just masterful at times. Admittedly, it could be sometimes stifled by unneeded close-ups of Margot Robbie, but regardless, Fennell is really great with her actors. I mean, she pulled what was probably a career best performance from Barry Keoghan in Saltburn, and here she directs a very different but devoted performance from Jacob Elordi. Margot was good too. I mean, but I think Elordi just stole the show more or less. I mean, this could be attributed to the character of Heathcliff himself being written as a stronger presence, more dominated on both the page and the screen. The same thing kind of occurred with the PBS adaptation when Tom Hardy was just so magnificent in the same role that everyone else in the film was just an afterthought. But this one is just kind of all over the place in popular opinion out there, where it's truly like a love it or hate it. You have certain sides, that really love it, certain sides that really hate it. Now, because Emerald really changed up a lot of stuff in this adaptation. The first big change that I had mentioned, that I personally kind of like too, is Hindley is non-existent pretty much in this one. So from what I understand, I think Hindley was just dead. I don't know if he died at childbirth or whatnot, but the father took over as the abusive, domineering presence in the film. To me, it kind of felt almost a little more natural, with greater motivation too, that the father would drunkenly take in Heathcliff because in a way he yearned for his dead son and he sort of wanted a replacement. But then he later on grew to resent him and abuse him because of the fact that he's just not Hindley. He just couldn't fill that void. But I appreciated that change. It was different and it worked. Another change, of course, I noticed was the character of Isabella. I mean, this one's more comical than anything, but I still think it works. It's funny, but Emerald made her obviously far more kinkier and weirder in this adaptation. And I mean, admittedly, it's a strange choice. It's just not necessarily a bad one. In a way, it makes Heathcliff less evil, I guess, because it's a little bit of a some, what do you call that, like sadomasochistic type of relationship going on there. Um, but it's just another decision that really lets Emerald turn this version into just something more truly her own. And from a filmmaking standpoint, I do think this is the best adaptation of them all. Just it's a very well made movie, even if it may not be the best adaptation of the particular story of Bronte's story. This is the best film of the ones that we had viewed. But what do you think, Shayna?
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with that. So Bobby was talking about how he really likes Saltburn, and I have to agree with that. I loved Saltburn, and this adaptation in particular had, I'd say, the same shock value as Saltburn in some of the scenes, which I really liked and appreciated. And on, at least on my Facebook, I think Bobby and I are in the minority by loving this movie because it got a lot of hate for not sticking to the book. But as far as film adaptations go, I like, most of the time, I like when they don't stick to the book and make the adaptation their own. So I really appreciated that Emerald did that. Now, I went ahead and wrote somewhat of a review for this one. So I'm just going to read out what I wrote here. But I said, I went into watching this assuming that it was going to be overrated, and the trailer looked rather cliche and stupid to me. And I was really hesitant on going. You can even ask Bobby. Like, I was like, man, this seems so stupid. Like, do I really want to see it? And he's like, yeah, I really want to see it. And he dragged me along.
I was more or less the one, making her go,
Yeah.
which is funny because it's on Valentine's Day, and I'm
Yeah.
like, I really want to go see Wuthering Heights.
Yeah, and of course all these girls were dragging their partners out to see it, and I'm just like, oh man. But anyways, he got me there, and as far as the rest of my review, I said, however, I was pleasantly surprised and actually really liked it. It was emotional, arousing, and psychological. It teased and taunted you in a good way. Jacob was the shining star of the film, in my opinion, and I feel like Margot did an okay job, but the movie could have been enhanced if a different actress with better chemistry with Elordi was used, in my opinion. The visuals were also appealing, and the erotic nature of some of the visuals were a nice touch as well. But I would have liked to see more of Heathcliff's downfall and the dark nature of it as portrayed in some of the other adaptations, like Andrea Arnold's. I think Elordi would have been good at this, especially since he showed a wide range of emotions during this video already. Another star of the show for me was definitely Alison Oliver, who played Isabella. Her quiet nature turning dark and demented was a highlight in the movie for me. I absolutely loved it, and Allison nailed it. And the fantastical and exaggerated setting and costumes modernized the movie for me, which I also liked. So as far as my top three, it's obviously the one with Jacob Elordi by Emerald. And my second favorite is the one directed by Andrea Arnold. And then my third favorite is the one with Tom Hardy. But if I could Frankenstein the perfect Wuthering Heights adaptation, it would probably be Tom Hardy as Heathcliff with the emotional, arousing, and psychological aspect of Emerald's adaptation, but the dark imagery of Andrea Arnold's. I think that would be by far the perfect Wuthering Heights, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with your Frankenstein. That would be a truly unique version there. I won't go down the list with all of the ones that we watched, but definitely my top three would be, Emerald Fennell's version being number one. Number two, I'd almost want to say the PBS version just for Tom Hardy alone. It's hard, especially because that was the first one that really got me really onto this story as a whole. And then the third one being Andrea Arnold's.
But that's it for this episode. I hope you all enjoyed this deep dive into Wuthering Heights. You can find Bobby on Letterboxd with over 1,000 of in-depth movie reviews. And yes, I said 1,000. I will leave a link to his Letterboxd down in the show notes, so be sure to check it out. Also, stay tuned for the next episode because I will be exploring several of Mary Oliver's poetry books for National Poetry Month in April. Although, since this episode was late, the next one will probably be out in early to mid-May. But thanks so much for listening, and I'll be back really soon with the next one.